Today is Wednesday, July the 23rd, 2025. I am Tom Edmondson. I am currently in the Atlanta, Georgia, United States area, talking once again with Dr. Anna Niiles-Mäki, who is in Finland. And today we start with her slides up front so you can see the title of today's discussion, plus the Institute for Purpose-Centered Philosophy in Finland, her organization, and the link to her website. And I encourage everyone to go there because if you click on it, you see the menu at the top. She has a whole section dedicated to English where you can order copies of her books, which are the first book is Introduction to Logotherapy, which is a highly recommended read. And then her second book, which came out in 2024, is called Handbook for Logotherapists, Theory and Praxis. This is our fourth podcast in which we are discussing concepts from that book because it is a very well-written, but also very academic book. I think one of the blessings of logotherapy is that it can be understood by people at various levels of intelligence or various levels of need. Maybe intelligence was a bad choice of words, but people have read Man's Search for Meaning and their lives have been changed by it. But those of us who want to work in the field need to read on the theory and therapy of mental disorders or will to meaning and so forth. So, Dr. or Anna, as we are on first name basis, today I'm happy to welcome you back and recommend our previous podcast to everyone who is watching to go back and learn from the depth of your work and your knowledge. This is a very well-written and very academic book. So I just want to start out with this statement and I will turn it over to you. I think that many people who have been practicing logotherapy and existential analysis for a long time, people who knew Viktor Frankl, people who have been in this field, they have a legitimate concern that today people are using logotherapy as an add-on to something else, that maybe they're not getting deep enough into the philosophy that logotherapy is built upon, and that they may not be truly understanding Viktor Frankl or his thought. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And thank you for your kind words. It means a lot.
Well, I just have to speak the truth, that's all.
Thanks. Thanks for that. For speaking the truth, always good.
Thank you.
Okay, so may we proceed with the slides?
Yes.
Okay, so our topic today, as we agreed with Tom, is the logotheoretic theory of consciousness. And first, I would like to explain why we really need a theory of consciousness in logotherapy, because we do. Understanding and explanation of humanity, as did Viktor Frankl and Lauri Rauhala, and these are presented in the third podcast. Understanding and explanation of humanity forms some realization of the human as being in the world, or as a situational entity, or as Frankl says it, dynamic unitas multiplex, or unitas multiplex. In both of Frankl's and Lauri Rauhala's philosophical perceptions of the human, the regional ontological question of logotherapy, and this was presented in the second podcast, the question has been answered rather congruently. And the question is, how is a person in the world? From the logotherapeutic framework, however, understanding the essence of a person is not enough, because to actually help the person with their purpose-related distortions, there is we need a deeper exploration, understanding, and explanation of how a person exists consciously. So we have to understand how a person is in the world, how humans are in the world. But that's enough. That's not enough, because when we try to affect consciously, I mean therapy and logotherapy, psychotherapy and logotherapy, when we try this, we have to first understand how a person exists consciously, not just how he exists in the world as a person, but we don't have to understand the structure and the functioning of the whole of the consciousness. Since Viktor Frank realized the existence of the neurological dimension in human consciousness that's qualitatively and ontologically different from the psychic dimension of human consciousness, the starting point of logotherapy must be the regional ontological understanding of the whole of the consciousness. And especially, we need to understand the neurological dimension of consciousness, because that is the field of logotherapy and logophilosophy, of course. But before I start to explain the logotheoretic theory of consciousness, we have to go back to the research on consciousness. The research on consciousness, it can be divided into 5 different areas, and they all have different research questions. The first research question is definition question. How should we define the term consciousness and its cognates? And this is something we have talked about with Tom. So how do we understand what is consciousness? We talk about soul, we talk about psyche, we talk about mind, we talk about awareness or conscious. In logotheoric theory of consciousness, this defining is based on Lauri Rauhala's specific and exact analysis. And this analysis is presented in the 3rd podcast. If I try to explain it here and now, we'll be in this podcast 3 hours more. so maybe it's better if I just go ahead.
That's right.
The second research question is phenomenological question. What phenomenological features does consciousness have? The logotheoretic theory of consciousness belongs exactly to this field of phenomenological research, and actually is the result of this. The third research question is epistemological question. How do we know about consciousness? The fourth research question is ontological question. How is consciousness located in the world? In other words, what has consciousness, and how the consciousness is located in the physical being? And the final 5th research question is axiological question. What values does consciousness have? What type of cognitive capacity or knowledge or moral status or aesthetic value does consciousness enable its possessors to have? These are the research questions. The research questions from 3 to 5. These require both philosophical and psychological understanding of the human consciousness, and they are answered by the logotheoretic theory of consciousness. But only the answer to the question of other than human consciousness, it still remains transcendent, because, in my opinion, and for many other people and researchers, the opinion is this, that Humans can't fully understand the ways of being in the world for other beings.
Right.
We understand from everything from our perspective.
Mhm.
So we try to explain other beings in the world from our perspective, and that's not understanding them, because
You know,
they
go ahead.
are they are quite different than we. They are ontologically different. So I feel that it's very arrogant to presume that some other species have this and that in their consciousness.
Right. This is one of the things I really appreciate about Viktor Frankl and his philosophical approach to psychology, and that is, as an example, whereas in existentialism, some people tend to be very negative. You think Camus and Sartre, life is absurd, life has no meaning. For Frankl, it's quite the opposite. And in this case, when we talk about consciousness, it's okay to be subjective in our thinking because we know that we are only able to understand human consciousness because of our own uh, being in the world as humans. So I think that really shows the genius of his philosophy in that we don't have to, as you said, be so arrogant as to think that we can explain everything or understand everything, but this is clearly focused on the human.
Yeah, and that's why I use the word human, maybe not a person or people, but human or humans, because I try to uh, emphasize this. So we proceed to the picture of the logotherapeutic theory of consciousness. And I think the best way to explain it is with this picture, following picture.
Okay.
This picture is quite extended because these treatment fields don't really belong to consciousness, but I added them because I think it's important to show the treatment fields that are connected to a certain part of consciousness. Because not every treatment or not every therapy is suited for all parts of consciousness. And why? I hope that I can, in this podcast, I can explain you why. So here we have, if we start from the subconscious part of the psychic dimension, it is that's connected to somatic reality, uh, our corporeality, our brain functioning, and so on. And because the subconscious part of psychic dimension is connected to somatic reality, the treatment field of this part of consciousness has to be psychiatry and psychoanalysis, because they are the fields that are connected to subconscious uh, functioning of the consciousness. The conscious part of a psychic dimension is connected to intra and intersubjective realities. And because of that, the treatment field for this part of consciousness has to be the field of psychology and psychotherapies. And I explain them, of course, later. But now just the overview. The conscious part of neurological dimension is connected to situational reality. And this situational reality or situation term is from Lauri Rauhala's redefined sense. So it doesn't just mean a situation you are in right now. It means it means so much more.
It means being in the world.
Yes, it means being in the world.
Yes.
It means my life world or your life world. Uh, or part of it, or part of life world all around.
Mhm.
Mm, because the conscious part of neurological dimension is connected to situational reality, the treatment field has to be logotherapy, of course. And the final part of consciousness is the subconscious part of the neurological dimension. And it's connected to transcendental reality. And because of that, the treatment field has to be pastoral logotherapy, pastoral care, and spiritual care. And these are the treatment fields. And some people ask me why this is not, why they are not, the fields are not therapy fields, why they are treatment fields. Just because not every treatment, when we try to affect consciousness, is therapy. Because, for example, spiritual care is not exactly therapy, because
Right.
spiritual care doesn't have the foundations in a specific science, a specific discipline. But for example, pastoral logotherapy has foundations, and pastoral care it has. But if we talk about, if we speak of about therapy, therapy is always rooted in some discipline. There has to be a discipline. There has to be some scientific field that can explore and study and understand and explain the human being. So, if how can I explain? If I call myself a therapist,
Mhm.
then I have to understand that uh, to be a therapist, I have to I have to have an education, and this education is derived from some science, some
Yes.
scientific field, of course. But if I'm saying I'm a therapist and I don't have any education, what that's derived from some science, then I'm not a therapist. I really am. I'm a
Uh,
healer. I can call myself a healer, but not a therapist.
I think I will try in my best to rescue you here for just a second, because what you're describing is exactly my dilemma. Uh, and it in a larger field of pastoral care. What is pastoral care? It's not therapy, but it is therapeutic. And as an example, I am a diplomate. I received my diplomate from the Viktor Frankl Institute of, you know, of logotherapy, but my degree is diplomate in logo philosophy, not logotherapy, because technically I am not a therapist. I do not. Um, I actually do have a few people I sit down with one on one and work with, but what a pastor does is different. It's not therapy, but it is therapeutic, but it is also ruled by a different discipline, which is theology. And there is a term, poemetics, but that's another ball of wax. But the real truth is, I am not a therapist, and I will only mention this go a little bit further, and I'll stop. But there are I'm at the end of a ministry. I'm about to change from one church to another, but I've been officially at this church for 8.5 years. I've been involved with its congregation for 10 years. And I have conducted probably 25 funerals at this church. And in order to be able to speak to the hearts and the minds and comfort the people, I have to know them, and I have, in some cases, 8.5 or 10 years of experience with these people, you know. And when I preach a sermon, the goal is to give them something that helps them with living the life and so forth. I didn't mean to make that long, but it's therapeutic, but it's not therapy. So I completely agree. I have to say I'm still meditating on the idea that the transcendent reality is subconscious. So hopefully you can help me with that area.
Okay.
But I hope maybe does that help a little bit with your struggle there to
Yeah, we did. Thanks a
it,
lot.
it is not
Thanks a lot.
it is not their pastoral care is not therapy, but there are people in the ministry who have stopped doing ministry and have focused only on counseling. So maybe that person does therapy, but then they have to bring in something else, like existential analysis or internal family systems or something else to supplement what they're doing. Okay. Does that help at all?
Uh,
You can say
I,
no, it's all right. You can say, Tom, you don't know what you're talking about. It's all right.
you really do, you really know what you're talking about. I was just wondering. Now maybe we'll go sidetracks here, but you were wondering about the subconscious part of neurological dimension. What kind of questions do you have about it?
Well, I think that as a minister, as a preacher, my job is to, and I think as a logotherapist, the goal is to activate that spiritual dimension. It means something different in logotherapy. It's not religious in logotherapy. You're just trying to activate that human spiritual dimension. But you know, his Frankel's last official book, his philosophical thesis, unbe, der unbewusste Gott, right? The unconscious God, which doesn't mean that God is unconscious. It means that we are not aware of God, or some people are not aware of God, who is whatever that means.
Mm. Because God is in a transcendental reality.
Yes,
God belongs, of course, God has to belong to the transcendental
yes.
reality. Let's say, okay, what if God were part of situational reality?
Hmm.
What if, what kind of a connection would we have to God if God was part of situational reality?
Again, a very difficult question, uh, because in my line of work, we tend to think of God as being involved in situational reality, but not as an incarnation. Now, as a Christian, I would believe that at one point in history, God became incarnated into situational reality.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a great question because we have to ask ourselves, uh, can God be God if God is involved in situational reality?
Mm. So if God were a part of our situational reality, God would be like you or me or like anyone else.
Yes,
God would not then be someone who's beyond our rational
exactly. Right,
explaining our thinking, or it would change everything.
right.
It would change everything because it would change the way we believe that life has a purpose.
Hmm.
It would change everything because then there wouldn't be any more a transcendental reality. Because
Right.
if we know God, we know everything.
That's
So
right.
there are limits
Right.
and there are nothing else anymore. Never. And God, we can talk to God and we can phone him and say, you know, uh, I heard that you are responsible of my time of death. So I would like to hear when it is so I can prepare. and he tells us, or not tells us, but it would change everything. So
Correct. Yes.
we, in order us to understand who we are and understand the limits of who we are, the limits of our knowing, the limits of our consciousness, the limits of we are so imperfect persons. We all
Right.
are, all of us. But if God was one of us, we would be the same at the same level with God.
Right. Yes.
God
The way I
maybe
like to say it is if we could understand God, we would be God ourselves,
mm,
or God would not be God. In other words, I agree 100%. God has to be above and beyond and even incomprehensible to us in many, many ways.
yes, because that is it should be like that.
Agreed. Yes.
Okay.
You said it.
Okay, I tried. I have to say to all viewers that I'm in Finland. Tom is in USA and I'm in Finland, and there's a terrible heat wave right now in Finland. Uh, plus 30 degrees Celsius, and it's really a lot in Finland. It's been like this for 2 weeks, and I hope I just can bear. I hope I just can I live through it somehow.
I do.
But sorry.
I hope you do as well. So 30 degrees Celsius is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And
So
to give
maybe
you
it's
an idea,
not maybe not a lot for you.
well, today is going to be a mild summer day, and it's going to be 87 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we consider that to be hot, but not real hot.
Really.
So this is normal for us in Georgia.
Yeah, we live in the same world, but still so far away, and the situations are so different. So
Yes.
different.
Yes.
Here we see it. So let's do a dissection
Okay.
to this consciousness and start with the subconscious part of the psychic dimension of consciousness. This dimension, the subconscious part, belongs to the regional ontological field of psychiatry and psychoanalysis. And it's always related to somatic reality through our own body and its functions. Of course, I mean also brain functioning, the brain state and its functioning. We have to understand that even now we understand only a little about the activity of the psychic subconscious, because its own area is in the interaction between itself and physicality. It has no mechanisms to reach out of the physical psychic self. So we really don't know much about the subconscious part of the psychic dimension. A person themselves is blind to their psychic subconscious until some entity from the unconscious strives to awareness in order to bring some phenomenon into the necessary understanding connection in a particular situation. So we don't know what's in our psychic subconscious until it rises to our conscious, psychic conscious. Then we know. And when we don't need to understand some phenomenon, it goes back. So the process is ongoing all the time. For example, an inexplicable strong behavior reaction. And that, by that I mean a reaction that couldn't be consciously understood and explained as part of a particular situation. So some behavioral reaction that I cannot explain rationally reveals in a certain specific situation an yet unknown physical reason behind the reaction, a reason which caused the reaction. The effort to uncover this unknown cause is part of the psychoanalytic treatment. So psychoanalysis is like this. Its job is to take some things to reveal some things from the unconscious and take them to the conscious. So a person can then understand what's going on in their consciousness. But the starting point in psychiatry can also be quite different. The starting point can be considered a still unknown brain chemical reaction. That's a cause, which caused a behavioral reaction and a psychological symptom, and that's a consequence. So it can go either way. So we move to the conscious part of the psychic dimension of consciousness. The activity of the conscious part of the psychic dimension belongs to the regional ontological field of psychology and psychotherapies. We must remember now that the psychic conscious and subconscious, they have mutual inner causal connection to each other. So when it comes to mental disorders, it's very difficult to distinguish when the origin of the cause is found in the somatic subconscious, when it's to be found in the intra and intersubjective conscious dimension. Mm-hmm. Because of this reason, in the case of mental disorders, the consequences, and I mean reactions that can be studied empirically, they are often treated instead of the causes.
Right.
This is why we treat the causes in psychiatry, in psychology, in psychotherapies, because it's very difficult to detect and to distinguish where the origin, where the basis is. And that's why it's easier to treat the causes. And we all know what can happen if we treat or just the consequences. We have talked about this a lot, what happens, what can happen. The conscious part of the psychic dimension is related to intra and intersubjective reality. Intrasubjective reality, that means a psychic dimension with its own qualitative contents and operating mechanisms. For example, I think that the most important mechanism is in the intrasubjective reality is the psychic self-regulation. I'm a psychology teacher too, so I know what I'm talking about when I say that this is the most important operating mechanism in the psychic dimension. And this emerges from the connection of the psychic dimension, the conscious part of the psychic dimension with its connection to intrasubjective reality. And we must remember now that the psychic dimension does not extend outside of itself. So
you're kind of referring here to what some people call emotional intelligence. I mean, not exactly, but there is that sense of self-awareness and self-regulation that is part of that discussion?
Not exactly.
Okay.
So the second revealing place in the life world is in intersubjective reality.
Mm-hmm.
And the conscious part of the psychic dimension of consciousness is always connected also to intersubjective reality. And that means an interaction where a person receives verbal or non-verbal feedback and modifies the thinking and behavior based on this feedback. And for example, I like really, it's maybe my favorite psychological theory is Ulrich Neisser's perceptual cycle. It's so good. But also the theories of emotion and all the developmental theories. They can prove that this intersubjective reality really works this way with the psychic dimension, the conscious part of the psychic dimension of consciousness. Now I have to say that when we talk about, I go back to the picture, slide 5, this picture. When we talk about these realities, they are not some separate realities. We talk about transcendental reality, somatic reality, and so on. They all are parts of the life world. So these realities, they all belong to the life world, but they show some perspective of view from the life world. Actually, I think it's more like reveal some perspective or reveal something from the life world to the consciousness.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's why they are the realities, but they are not some separate realities. So I live in situational reality. What reality do you live?
Right,
So,
right.
Yeah, we all live in the same.
Multiplex.
Sorry.
A unitus multiplex.
Yes. We have to remember that much more is known about the qualities and the operating mechanisms of the conscious part of the psychic dimension. That's subconscious. But when we compare psychology to many other disciplines, psychology is very young science still. And there are a lot of new results published every day.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know where we are heading in psychology. We are now, I think we are heading to biological psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that is not the right way, but still the psychology field is very strongly have this account that we don't have a free will in our consciousness. People don't have the free will, and everything we do is deterministic. But we come to that later. Now we proceed to the conscious part of the neurological dimension of consciousness. And that belongs to the regional ontological field of philosophy and logotherapy.
Mm.
And the agents of the neurological dimension, and there are two agents, self-distancing and self-transcendence. They act only in relation to the situational and the transcendental reality. And this means that, for example, in self-distancing, a person does not understand themselves and their own state or situation without orientation outside of themselves towards others, other humans or other beings. By turning towards other beings and other phenomena, for example, values or God or the ultimate purpose of life, a person can understand their own place of being in the world. If a person only operates in the so-called bubble of intra and intersubjective reality, they do not get the perspective needed to understand their own being in the world and their own essence. So we need to step out, reach out from our dimension of consciousness to understand something. Self-distancing implicitly includes self-transcendence.
Right.
Because of this, the action of self-distancing is always primary in neurological dimension and serves as the basis for existential analysis too. So there are agents and qualities in the neurological dimension, and they function with each other. And the primary operating mechanisms are self-distancing and self-transcendent. Which of them self-distancing is always primary? And that's the basis of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The relationship between the agents of the neurological dimension and the situational and the transcendental reality differs from the relationship between the operating mechanisms of the psychic dimension and its realities. The relationship between somatic and intra and intersubjective reality and the psychic dimension and its difference to the functioning of the neurological dimension, it can be clearly stated. The psychic dimension remains in its own somatic psychic without reaching outside of itself. That is quite clear. But instead, the difference between the relationship between the psychic conscious dimension and intersubjective reality and the situational and transcendental reality of the neurological dimension, that can be more difficult to understand, because people have always asked me that isn't the situational reality actually just the same as intersubjective reality? Because they don't understand the difference between those two.
It seems counterintuitive, like we want to think that what goes on inside is the most important, but in reality, if we can't step outside of ourselves and interact with other people, we're not a complete or a whole entity.
Mm. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. But I think that people don't understand that it feels like we are outside of the psychic dimension when we are in some interaction with some other people. But that's not so, because verbal or non-verbal penetration. Sorry, I start earlier. Since the psychic dimension of consciousness, it does not read outside of itself. In the subjective reality, it penetrates the psychic dimension in interaction with others and other beings. When encountering something, really stays in the psychic dimension, but it is experienced as external to oneself. So when we are, it's really hard to demonstrate this, but when we are in some interaction with some other person, or for example, my cat, or somebody's interaction with their dog. So what happens there? It happens that this in this interaction, we get feedback. And this feedback is something that we use to modify
Yes.
our thinking and behavior. So
Right.
there's not, it's not stepping outside, it's not
Right.
reaching outside,
Right.
but it's always staying in the psychic dimension. It's always about staying in the psychic
Yes.
dimension, because this feedback, this interaction, and the feedback we use is
Hmm.
not reaching out.
Yes. Okay. So may I? I'm going to try to see if I can work through this because I
Okay.
believe I understand what you're saying, but I want to try to say it differently. In a sense, my psychic um, consciousness is my inner self, my inner person, and it has its own understanding of reality. But in my interaction with something outside of myself, another human being, an animal, or whatever, I receive stimulus or feedback that may not agree with my inner perception of reality, but it should in some way alter it positively or negatively. And so to me, this is a sidebar maybe, but this kind of argues against Descartes, the whole idea of starting from myself. What do I know? Cogito ergo sum. I know, therefore I am. But the truth is, maybe it's more of a Martin Buber, ich und du, a I and thou, is a higher dimension than the interpsychic dimension. Anyway, I feel like I've muddied the water there a little bit, but I think I'm catching on to what you're saying.
Okay, because what you say, mm, I think you understood
Okay,
just right. Mm,
good to
This
know.
this verbal or non-verbal, we must remember that not every interaction is verbal. It can be non-verbal. It can be gestures
Mhm.
or something. This penetration can affect favorably or unfavorably on the activity of the psychic dimension. For
Mhm.
example, through the quality of the attachment styles,
Mhm.
according to the attachment theory, or upbringing or receiving feedback. And we use it, and maybe we don't consciously, maybe we don't use it, but it always has some consequences in our psychic dimension. It always has some consequences. This feedback. If we don't ever get feedback, I don't I don't know what kind of life that would be, what kind of reality that would be. But if we don't get feedback, so our psychic dimension of consciousness would stay the same always,
Mhm.
because this interaction and these reactions we get, and this stimulus we get, different kind of stimuli we get, and to which we react. That is what changes the psychic dimension of consciousness. Instead, the conscious part of the neurological dimension reaches out at itself. So it functions in relation to the situational reality. The effort to understand one's own place of being in the world and the will to purpose are already preset prerequisites. What's this pronounced right?
Prerequisites.
Prerequisites. Okay, thanks. Uh, Prerequisites for the functioning of the neurological dimension. So a person is always intertwined with the situation.
Mhm.
And understanding this intertwining, both from the point of view of themselves and others, that creates connections of meaning that shape thinking and action in the neurological dimension.
Right.
And it's true that a person does not find purposes unless they already have a predetermined, at least as a potential, this ability for a will to find a purpose. They need a will to find a purpose and the ability to reach outside of themselves to find those purposes. The activity of the subconscious part of the neurological dimension, that belongs to the regional ontological field of philosophy and other sciences that study the relationship of human to the transcendent, as well as logotherapy, but also to the field of pastoral, logotherapy, pastoral care, and spiritual care. And the agents of the subconscious part of the neurological dimension, and they are just the same. These agents are just the same in the subconscious part and in the conscious part of the neurological dimension. They are self-distancing and self-transcendent. And the qualities of the subconscious part of the neurological dimension are faith and conscience.
I like that. I agree.
Yeah, and the subconscious part of the neurological dimension is related, it's always connected to the transcendental reality. But like the subconscious part of the psychic dimension, the neurological subconscious is always a blind area for itself. And now I take an example for this. Let's take conscience, which is a quality of the subconscious part of the neurological dimension. A person is only aware of the existence of this quality in themselves in a situation where they act in the area of neurological conscious, when they act either against their conscience or accordance with it. So conscience manifests itself in aware actions when a person uses their neurological dimension. And according to Alfred Lengle, he talks about existing and vegetating. So these kind of people exist. So conscience, okay, if a person does not act in the area of the neurological dimension, but only in the psychic realm, their activity is called vegetation, according to Alfred Lengle. Their
is he
activity.
going from Aristotle on this as well? Is he going back to Aristotle?
I'm sorry?
Aristotle, vegetative consciousness?
I think so, because I haven't had another explanation for these terms. So I think they are from Aristotle.
So for Langla, consciousness is an epiphenomenon rather than a given part of the human being. That's how I understand the difference or the split between Frankl and Langla was that Langla was arguing that the neurological dimension is an epiphenomenon as opposed to structure, I guess a structural part of human consciousness.
Okay, so the psychic dimension and the activity is characterized by causality. So a person acts on the deterministic cause and effect principle, so that a previous stimulus, that is a cause, it triggers a reaction, that's a consequence, regardless of whether the stimulus is external or internal. And by this, I mean external stimulus can be another person who says something bad or good, or internal is a person's own psychic structure. The structure, inner structure of the psychic dimension of consciousness. And in this case, conscience has nothing to do with the stimulus reaction activity in questions, either ontologically or in its action, because the neurological dimension has fundamentally different operating principles and properties than the psychic one. So if we take conscience, I don't know if we can say it like this, but if I try to be concrete somehow, I say that conscience lives in the subconscious part in the neurological dimension. It lives there, so it doesn't make mistakes. The conscience in itself is ontologically rooted in the subconscious part, like faith.
Right.
But the action belongs to the situational reality.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really know if we have conscience until it works, until it functions. Then we know we have a conscience.
Because it's been activated by some kind of a stimulus.
Yeah, because
a situation.
Yeah. Because in the neurological dimension, I don't really like to talk about stimulus or reactions.
Okay.
Because in the neurological dimension, it operates with the principle of free will, and the psychic dimension,
right.
Consciousness operates cause and effect, stimulus and reaction principle. So the principles about functioning are quite different.
I would say, however, and I know I'm being a little difficult. I don't mean to be difficult, but could it well be that in a situation where the psychic dimension calls for a response to a stimulus, from the noetic dimension, from the conscience, I can overrule that. I can decide to not function according to the psychic. My example would be,
okay.
I think in Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl talks about how Freud says, if you reduce everyone to animal existence, they're going to behave as animals. But he can show examples from the camps where someone gave up their last piece of bread, or they gave comfort as they themselves were dying, so that instead of acting on their psychic or somatic level, they allowed their noetic dimension to kind of overrule that.
Yeah, of course it overrules, because it operates, the whole neurological dimension operates in the principle of free will. So
Yeah,
there is no stimulus reaction model, but the psychic dimension has this stimulus reaction model, and it's always connected to our somatic reality in one way or another.
Yes,
so if we are really, really hungry or starving to death, so we have these instincts for surviving, resilience. We may have resilience, strong resilience for surviving. But in the neurological dimension, we can still evaluate our actions, our right or wrong doings, and maybe if we are starving, but this 3-year-old child is starving too, we see that it's more important to help her if we can.
Yes.
And starve ourselves. And I'm not saying that this is true, but if we were acting only in the psychic dimension, maybe this drive to stay alive would overrule this helping.
Right.
Maybe because I think there are some research results that are not very positive about helping it other people. But
Right.
that's only our operating in the psychic dimension of consciousness, because the conscience doesn't live there.
Right.
Conscience lives in the neurological dimension of consciousness.
I think this is what you were kind of leading up to when you mentioned the problems with this new emphasis on biological psychology and
Yeah,
right. This sort of keeps everybody in the basement, to use the Freudian language. Everybody's working from the basement, and
yeah,
logotherapy is to bring us up to the higher level.
yeah. Uh, so the whole of a consciousness consists of deterministic psychic dimension, which operates on its own mechanisms, and indeterministic neurological dimension, which operates on a free will operating principle. They have different kind of operational principles, these dimensions. So consciousness is both deterministic and indeterministic. And in discussion about potentiality of the human free will, the logotheoretic theory of consciousness is situated with a compatibilist view. And in this compatibilist view, if you know what it is, the answer to the problem of free will is representatives of the compatibility theory. They argue that both deterministic and indeterministic positions can be reconciled in a human action.
Mm.
Consciousness can then, they really can have both the deterministic and the indeterministic parts, where the indeterministic part is, of course, the neurological dimension of human consciousness, and it serves as an integrated, situated self of the whole of the consciousness. So it gathers everything. Neurological dimension is indeterministic, and it operates with free will. It doesn't have this stimulus reaction model, and it's of course then it's not deterministic. But the psychic dimension of consciousness is deterministic. So when we talk about in psychology, we talk about that people don't really have a free will. In psychology, they are right, because psychic dimension doesn't have free will. It's
Right.
deterministic. But the neurological dimension is that kind of situated self, as Ismail Jenan says. It's the gathering dimension that guides all of the self. So there are no contradictions between deterministic or indeterministic views or dispute about the free will. The logotherapic theory of consciousness can explain why the both can be in the same consciousness. And
Yes.
this is the compatibilist view.
Wow. See, so here's yet another uh, another supporting argument for logo philosophy that you have brought to our attention.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
So now we come back to the research questions 3 to 5, because I have tried to explain, at least I have tried. I have tried to explain the structure and functioning of the human consciousness. And now we see how logotheoretic theory of consciousness aims to answer these research questions. And because we don't have limitless amount of time here, so the answers are very brief here, but I suggest you can maybe it's better if the viewers read my book, because
Yes,
they would understand better then.
absolutely.
So how does the logotheoretic theory of consciousness aim to answer the research questions 3 to 5 concerning consciousness? So the question number 3 was an epistemological question. How do we know about consciousness? So from a logotheoretic view, the answer is that we know about consciousness only through its functioning. So consciousness manifests itself in its functioning. And this applies both the psychic and the neurological dimensions of the human consciousness. We don't know anything about the consciousness until it functions and shows itself in the functioning. This is a phenomenology. And the fourth question was an ontological question. How is consciousness located in the world? What has consciousness and how the consciousness is located in the physical being?
Right.
So the logotheoretic answer is that we can understand and study properly only human consciousness and only through its functioning. The somatic reality, and particularly the brain state of a human, is the platform of the whole consciousness. Like the other realities too, they all are platforms of the consciousness. They all reveal something important from the life world. But conscious actions always need all the ontological aspects of the existing human essence. And now we go back to these theories of humanity or human essence. Because in Lauri Rauhala's theory, there are 3 aspects of the human essence. And these all aspects, they need each other to exist themselves. And these aspects of a human essence are corporeality, so anything somatic functioning, and consciousness, the whole consciousness, and situationality. I think that was better. Situationality, yeah. So all 3 are required.
Yep.
And the final 5th research question was an axiological question. What values does consciousness have? In other words, what type of cognitive capacity or knowledge or moral status or aesthetic values does consciousness enable its possessors to have? And the answer, the logotheoretic answer, is that the psychic dimension has its own operational mechanisms, and it functions with cause-effect or stimulus-reaction model. The psychic dimension of consciousness is always related to the somatic reality and intersubjective reality. And now comes something new. And it interprets experiences of these realities in relation to its intersubjective reality in order to develop ways of implementing meanings and acting the most optimal way in the interactive relationships. And it means interacting with people in the society. But the neurological dimension of consciousness, it has its own agents and qualities, and it functions with freedom of will. The neurological dimension of consciousness is always related to transcendental reality and situational reality. And it interprets experiences of these in order to implement values and purposes the most optimal way in the world. So you can see now that the purpose or aims of these dimensions are quite different. So they have some things they operate differently, and the result is also different.
There's a very simple concept that keeps coming to mind as you're explaining all these things, and that is um, the way I see it is you're talking about how through the logotherapeutic theory of consciousness, we are harmonizing our inner psychic world or our psych, uh, psychophysicum with our noetic or our outer world and our, I think I've just put too many words in there, but it's like the inner world and the outer world are going to be kind of harmonized when we begin to understand noetically the purposes and meanings that exist outside of ourselves, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. I think you just combined everything I said.
Okay.
So good. So the whole of a consciousness is a unity. We must remember that. We don't have to remember that there are different parts and different realities, and different this and different that. The most important thing is to understand that the human consciousness is a unity. It has two different dimensions, neurological dimension and the psychic dimension. And it has four parts. The psychic dimension has a conscious part and subconscious part, and the neurological dimension has a conscious part and subconscious part. And they are connected to each other the same way as the aspects of human essence are connected to each other. So that these parts, like the aspects, the three aspects of the human essence, they require each other, each other's existence in order to exist themselves. This is very important. This means that there cannot be such case that a human consciousness is missing, for example, a subconscious part of the psychic dimension, but the other parts of consciousness, they would exist. This means that in order to function the most optimal way, the consciousness needs both dimensions and all the aspects of reality to which these dimensions are connected. So when the whole of a consciousness works in its optimal way,
Mhm.
all the dimensions, both dimensions and all the parts are active. The whole consciousness functions within the awareness unconscious axis. And in my picture, there was this two blue arrows. In such a way that from the unconscious, phenomena that require a necessary understanding in a particular situation emerge into awareness, and vice versa. So the process is everlasting. As long as we live, the process is ongoing in our consciousness. And although logоphilosophy focuses on the neurological dimension of human consciousness and its functioning, a logotherapist, they must understand the structure and operating principles of the whole of the consciousness, both the psychic and the neurological dimension, in order to be able to separate psychological or psychiatric disorders from the purpose-based distortions of the neurological dimension. So it's not sufficient enough, it's not adequate enough that we know neurological dimension and its functioning. We also have to understand the psychic dimension and its functioning, its structure and its functioning.
Yes.
So we have to understand both and understand how the whole of the consciousness functions. And also we have to understand that there are two there are two qualitatively different operational principles in the whole of the consciousness. Deterministic, cause and effect or stimulus reaction model, which is the principle of the psychic, and the free will, which is the principle of the functioning of the neurological dimension.
Right.
And the other is deterministic, and the other is indeterministic.
Right.
So we can have the parts of us don't have the free will, and parts of us do. So there are psychologists, there are a lot of psychologists who agree that this compatibilist theory might be the right one, because we have to admit that from the empirical view, that some actions are more free than the other actions.
Right.
We intuitively know that we may make aware actions with our free will, and sometimes we just react and act upon it.
Right. That's true.
So I have some questions. Now we go back to the interventionist theory, and it was in my book on page 12. It was presented, this interventionist theory. But according to it, an intervention targeting a certain state or level or dimension of consciousness can have an effect on this state of consciousness, but not necessarily the other states of consciousness.
Right.
And according to logotherapeutic theory of consciousness, the consciousness consists of the psychic and the neurological dimension. And these dimensions are connected to somatic, intra, and intersubjective reality, and to the situational and transcendental reality. And all these aspects of reality constitute the platform of consciousness. They all reveal something from the life world itself.
Right.
So I have two kinds of questions, actually. Questions 1 and 3 are about the psychic dimension of consciousness. And question 1 is that what kind of intervention could have an effect on the psychic dimension of consciousness? And where do these interventions come from? So what kind of interventions could have some effect? And question number 3 is that if the intervention targets the psychic dimension, what kind of effects can it generate in a person?
So just to give one example, would we be talking about maybe someone who's experiencing a mood disorder or something along that line? Behavioral, well, maybe let's take I don't know, say maybe depression would be a good one to talk about in both areas, is if it's caused by something physical or something psychic, the intervention would be what, medicine or psychoanalysis or something?
Great.
Okay.
Just great, yes, because I have this picture.
Oh, sorry.
And
You're gonna explain.
you are just right. You are just right. So I don't have to explain, because when we talk about the psychic dimension, it has these two parts. They are connected to different kind of realities or different kind of aspects of the life world. So we talk about the subconscious part of the psychic dimension. It's connected to the somatic reality. And if the intervention happens in this area, like you said, Tom, the example can be something that we do to the brain state. So, for example, intervention can be stimulation of the brain by medicine. or neuromodulation by stimulating straight, the brains. And the effect would be, of course, alterations in the psychic dimension, and that means favorable or unfavorable functioning of the brain state. So by stimulation of the brain, when we stimulate the brain, the effect can be favorable or unfavorable functioning of the brain state. Sometimes it's unfavorable with all side effects or wrong medicine or wrong place of stimulation. Sometimes it's favorable. And then when we operate in the conscious part of the psychic dimension, which is connected to intra and intersubjective reality, then we talk about the operational principle, the operational mechanisms and principles of the psychic. And we mean the internal and external behavior. And if intervention happens in this area, the examples can be, for example, emotional abuse in a close relationship or a positive feedback in a close relationship. And the effect would be alterations in the psychic dimension, of course, and that means favorable or unfavorable functioning of the mental state. If the intervention is, for example, a very strong positive feedback in a close relationship, then the alteration would be favorable functioning of the mental state. So the mental state changes in a favorable way. But if the intervention is, for example, emotional abuse in a close relationship, then the effect would be unfavorable new functioning of the mental state. So this affects straight to the mental state. And now questions 2 and 4 about the neurological dimension. So what kind of interventions could have an effect on the neurological dimension of consciousness? And where do these interventions come from? And 4, if the intervention targets the neurological dimension, what kind of effects can it generate in a person? So could you be kind to make some example, or
Okay.
do I just show the example?
Well, to answer question number 2, I would say some kind of a moral appeal to people could be, from my line of work, or from a biblical perspective, the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, worked really hard to bring people's attention to injustice, to terrible things that were going on. And the appeal was to the conscience and not to something physical or mental. I do think that there are other examples. I'm trying to think of something that would be a little bit more clinical. Maybe in family counseling or marriage counseling, there might be a need to appeal to the sense of commitment that people make to each other to overrule any physical or mental problems that they're discussing. Trying to think of a good example. I don't know that I'm helping very much right now.
Maybe you think of, I think you are going a little bit further than that.
Okay.
The meaning
Right.
is because now we stick to the consciousness.
Okay. So maybe in terms of depression, let's go back to depression. If it's not rooted in a physical issue like a thyroid disorder. If it's not a psychological issue, then maybe it's a noetic uh, neurosis, as Frankl might have called it. The purpose in life does not line up with the experiences that the person is having. And so I guess in that case, there would be the appeal to uh, the neurological dimension to find the meaning in the current situation, which is not giving them an antidepressant, and it's not, uh, well, let's just stick with that. It's not giving them an antidepressant. It's helping them to find a way of dealing with their their existential crisis.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes. Perfect,
Okay.
I must say,
Glad to hear it.
because I show you the example of the intervention. And yet again, the neurological dimension has two parts. There is the conscious part, which is connected to situational reality, and the subconscious part, which is connected to the transcendental reality. And if the intervention happens in the area that or comes from the area of the situational reality, the examples can be, for example, that the situation forces a person to act against their values they are committed to, or situational reality offers new purposes for a person to find. So this intervention has to come from the situational reality, of course.
Right.
And the effect would be then alterations in the neurological dimension. And that means a favorable or unfavorable functioning of the neurological dimension. And the same goes with the other part. So if the intervention happens in the area of transcendental reality, the example could be losing faith in God. And that means that God is lost or gone in the transcendental reality of mind. Or another example, a strong realization of the purposeful nature of life, finding faith would be another. Because the intervention, if it comes from the transcendental reality, we must know what is in transcendental reality.
Mm-hmm.
Faith and conscience, of course, these two. And if the interventions are like this, and if the interventions comes from the transcendental reality, the effect would be alterations in the neurological dimension, which means favorable or unfavorable functioning of the neurological dimension. And now you see something that's different from the psychic dimension. The effects of interventions in the psychic dimension can be favorable or unfavorable functioning of the brain state, or favorable or unfavorable functioning of the mental state. So in the psychic dimension, there can be qualitatively different effects. But in the neurological dimension, it's not so, as you can see. So can you discover why this is so? Why the psychic dimension may have effects that alter the mental state, or effects that alter the brain state. And the neurological dimension doesn't have this kind of difference between the situational reality and the transcendental reality. And the answer lies in the functioning of the neurological dimension.
That is a very deep question. Is it because the psychic and somatic dimensions are more deterministic and the neurological dimensions more indeterministic? When you get to transcendent reality, you're talking about that which is really, in many ways, beyond human comprehension as well. So that really complicates things. But I don't think that's answering your question.
The answer is more simple than that.
I figures.
Again, you went a little further,
Yeah,
but everything you said was right. Everything you said was right. But to be, the answer is more simple. The answer is this: we must remember now what are the qualities of the subconscious part of the neurological dimension. Do you remember the two qualities?
faith
The
and
agents are the same, but the qualities are...
oh, you're talking about self-distancing and self-transcendence?
No, they are the agents.
Okay.
But the qualities,
Quality.
because the agents are these operating agents that help to with the connection to the realities, help to emerge the qualities. I remember that in my book. I have also a picture of this, the emergence of the qualities. But what are the two qualities?
Faith and conscience.
Yes. And now this is the answer. So they exist ontologically they live ontologically. The place ontologically is in the subconscious part of the neurological dimension. But they function in the situational reality. So always when they function, when I believe, when I have faith, when my conscience works, when I do something against my conscience, or I do something according to it, I do it in my conscious part of the neurological dimension, in the situational reality. So there are no distinctions. The whole of the neurological dimension works together. So there cannot be different kind of alterations because of these two qualities that live in the subconscious part, but function in the conscious part and are connected to situational reality, like the conscious part of neurological dimension. So this was the simplified answer.
It all comes together. It all makes sense. Yes.
This is so beautiful about consciousness studies and actually logotherapy, because it all comes together. It all has a solid foundation, a solid basis, which you can build upon.
Right.
And these are, I have some questions for further reflections. These are questions that I think every logotherapist should ask. For example, can the intervention happening in the intersubjective reality directly affect the neurological dimension? What do you say, Tom?
Well, I think the answer is yes, but I don't know that I don't know.
Again.
I want to say yes, but I don't know that that's the correct answer.
Please think again,
Yeah.
because you have to go back.
So let me give you an example of what I'm thinking about, and you can tell me where I made a mistake. Um, Somebody who has who is depressed, and that, or let's say that they don't eat properly. I think I'm answering my own question. They don't eat properly, and they feel their body feels sick. It affects their feeling about things. They get depressed or they get negative thoughts. Somehow there's a chemical imbalance because of not bad nutrition or whatever. And somehow they relate that to their beliefs about transcendent reality. That sounds kind of bizarre the way I say it, but
Mm,
that's not, you're going to say that, I think you're going to say that in reality, um, that is just simply an intersubjective or intrasubjective
yeah,
problem, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That, yeah,
I see where you're going with that. Yes.
yeah. Uh, the intersubjective reality means this what's the word? Feedback we get from someone, and
Yes.
from this feedback we modify our thoughts and behavior. So intervention, when it happens in the intersubjective reality, I show you. These are the interventions, and the right one has the examples. Intervention that can be positive feedback or emotional abuse in a close relationship.
Mm.
So, can it directly affect the neurological dimension?
I think uh, if we're talking about abuse in a relationship and it causes, I'm thinking, I guess, probably from a object relations kind of point of view. Um, if a child, for instance, forms their opinions about God based on their human relations with parents, would that be an example?
Mm. Uh, Opinions and opinions are based on the feedback. So
Okay.
I have as a child, I may have, when I was a child, some sort of feelings and opinions, and they come from my parents,
Mhm.
and I have they come straight from my parents or grandparents or so. I have these opinions, but they all are, and they all stay in the psychic dimension of consciousness.
Mhm.
So when some intervention targets the psychic dimension of consciousness, it doesn't have direct effect on the neurological dimension of consciousness, because the operating or functioning of the psychic dimension of consciousness doesn't have effects on the functioning of the neurological dimension of consciousness. So there is no causation. There's
Okay.
no mutual causation uh,
Mhm.
or upward causation. There's only downward causation. The neurological dimension, as this gathering self, it has, it may have uh, some effects on the psychic dimension of consciousness,
Yeah.
but not the other way around.
Right.
So if some intervention happens in the neurological dimension of consciousness, it may have some effects on the psychic dimension of consciousness.
Mm. Right.
The next question is, can the intervention happening in the somatic reality directly affect on the psychic dimension?
Well, I'll go back to my first answer and say, I guess if a person is hungry and therefore having a chemical imbalance, you can give them food and it will restore a sense of balance that may affect them psychically.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's correct. Uh, okay, I have a final question. Can the existence of the neurological dimension affect the existence of the psychic dimension?
I believe so. I think yes.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Because now we are talking about existing, not functioning. They are
Hmm.
two different things.
Right, right, right,
Like conscience. Conscience exists in the subconscious part of the neurological dimension, but it functions in the conscious part of the neurological dimension in the situational reality.
right.
So the parts of consciousness, they are always connected to each other in the same way as the aspects of a human essence are connected to each other. So that all these parts, these four parts, like the aspects, like the three aspects of the human essence, they require each other's existence in order to exist themselves.
Hmm.
So there cannot be such case that human consciousness is missing some part. It doesn't exist at all. In order to function fully or in the most optimal way, the consciousness needs both dimensions and all the aspects of reality to which these dimensions are connected.
Mm.
So what if there is a situation that I meet my friend Jenny, or I meet a girl, Jenny. I don't know her so well, but I start to talk with her, and I start to wonder if do I really detect her neurological dimension? Do I really find that her neurological dimension is functioning? So I try to hesitate.
Yeah.
And I try to question myself that what if her neurological dimension is not functioning?
Right.
So is her consciousness functioning? The question is this. If I don't detect, if I don't feel or experience that her neurological dimension is activated and functioning,
Right.
can she still have the functioning of the consciousness?
Well, that's a tough question for me to answer because, based on my experience in ministry and dealing with people, um, it's my opinion that there are people who are not functioning at the neurological level. I tend to speak in a very crude way to say that there's a person without a conscience. I don't mean they don't have one. I mean they're not in touch with it. And so this is a dilemma. I guess the perfect example for me would be what is clinically called a narcissist. Not
Yeah.
generally. Somebody says, "Well, he's so full of himself, he's a narcissist," but an actual someone who's actually diagnosable in a clinical setting as a narcissist. Here's a person that, well, let's take Joseph Mengele, for instance. A man who could do terrible things to other human beings and then come home and smoke a cigar, drink wine, and listen to Beethoven and play with his daughter. How does a person do that?
Mm.
So that's a I find that a real dilemma, because in my line of work, I should not write anybody off as unsavable or unhelpable, that they're too far gone. I should be able to say there's a way to help that person activate their noetic dimension, their conscience, and be a more fully functioning person. That's a tough one.
Yeah. If we think in a simplified way again, so there's a there's a distinction between functioning and existing. So if I'm questioning that, does Jenny have consciousness? Because I don't detect anything functioning in the neurological dimension.
Mhm.
The answer is that she has a consciousness, because the neurological dimension exists in her consciousness, but it's not activated. It's not
Right.
functioning at all, but exists. It exists.
Right.
Her consciousness doesn't function fully or in the most optimal way, because half of her consciousness is only in a potential level, hiding and not working at all.
Mhm.
But still she has it,
Right.
because
Right.
it's a problem. um, it's a difference between existing and functioning.
Right.
Do you think that there are people who do not use, or whose neurological dimension hasn't been activated at all? I don't mean children, because it's different, and that's normal developmental things. But I mean grown-ups.
Yes.
Okay, so you have a strong opinion that
I think
that's so.
right. I would say based on experience, and but I'm taking all of this into consideration. I do think that there are adults who can suppress or deny or resist their conscience. Um, and so that's where I struggle to define the problem, because it could very well be that the conscience is speaking to them and they are ignoring it. Um, and I think, again, from a biblical point of view, that if they continue to do that, that there are consequences. But again, I guess they are still noetic consequences. I have a Is there a developmental possibility in some people that, due to some psychic or mental problem, maybe they have, I don't want to say Down syndrome, but some kind of other issue that they can be, that's probably totally wrong. I'm just trying to think of some sort of developmental issue that prevents people from reaching uh, the level of being able to be, uh, to have that.
Responsible.
Responsible, yes. Because there are arguments that are made in courtrooms and in other environments where people say, well, they're not responsible because of this problem or that problem.
Mm. This is a really a complex issue,
Right.
because Viktor Frankl has stated that even a person who has schizophrenia, I think it was schizophrenia,
Right.
knows that
Right.
10 knows that 5 plus 5 is 10. So every person has a chance. Every person has this potentiality, and the moments when
Yes.
he or she can use their neurological dimension, because it's not connected to uh, intellectuality.
Right. And see, I agree with that 100%. That's why I felt really bad about saying, you know,
Mm.
Down syndrome. But you know, there are people who just may use that as an excuse. Whatever, you know, uh, there's a famous story here in the United States about someone who, I guess, committed murder and was on trial and said, "Well, I had eaten, you know, sugary foods, and I had such a high concentration of sugar that I couldn't control myself or whatever." I don't buy that. You know, that's
Mm. Me neither. Mm.
so,
The question is about freedom of will and responsibility. If
yes.
we think that there is a dimension in a human consciousness that operates, that functions with the principle of free will, so we have to make the conclusion that they are then responsible, because freedom and responsibility are the two parts of the coin, or two sides of the coin. They always come together, freedom and responsibility.
Right. Right.
Now, if we think that, like the logotherapeutic theory of consciousness says, that there is a part that is indeterministic, and that has free will and responsibility, of course, and it exists. The question is this existing enough, or does it need to work? So if some people says that it's not my fault because of this, because of that, or or some people have, for example, Down syndrome, and how can we find out if it works, or if it just exists?
Well, I've always believed that if a person says, "I'm not responsible because of this reason," that they're actually giving
Mm,
a reasoned, willful response, therefore they are responsible, you know? So
yeah.
I don't buy that, and I also agree with Frankl that, it's not about your IQ, that a person with any kind of whatever disability that we may describe can still behave in a moral fashion. And even it describes the woman who was dying and delirious. She still knew to pray. You know, she still
Mm,
knew to reach out to
mm,
God. So I agree wholeheartedly with that. And I especially love the fact that he says, or he wrote that Jeanne d'Arc or Joan of Arc uh, may have been a schizophrenic to a psychiatrist, but she was still a saint. You know, so
mm,
yeah, I agree with that. I just would have to say that there are people that we deal with on a daily basis that clearly have that noetic dimension turned off, or the volume is turned down very low so that they don't really hear it. That's the only answer that I can give to that question.
mm. I agree with you. So the conclusion is that there is a free will,
Yes.
and there is a responsibility,
Mhm.
and no one can really say that they are not responsible for their actions.
I agree. Absolutely.
So we have come to the last slide, which contains some references, some literature, which I have used
Very nice. Thank
in
you.
this podcast. It was quite a long
Well, I
podcast.
feel like I just came out of a PhD seminar, is what I so
But we have fun.
we did. And I am very grateful to you, of course, for this podcast, for your books. This is the fourth podcast, and very briefly, I'll say the first podcast was on the theory of interventionism, which we talked about just a moment ago. That was on June the 11th of 2024. The second podcast, we talked about regional ontology. the third podcast in February of this year, we talked about Laurie Rauhala, situationality as an aspect of existence and so forth. And then today, of course, the logotherapeutic theory of consciousness. So you have given us a lot, and it's starting to make sense. I'm not saying that it didn't make sense. I'm just saying it's really starting to click in my mind, and that was requires a lot of hard work, but a lot of patience and good explanation on your part. So that's really very much appreciated. We have one more podcast based on your book, and we'll figure that one out sometime in the future. But I really very much appreciate your contribution to this, and I hope people will study very carefully everything that you have presented in these 4 podcasts so far. I hope they will buy your book and read it, and I think the world of logotherapy will be better because of it. How about that?
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. We will end this discussion now, and once again, thank you for your time. I hope that you stay cool. It is now 78 degrees here, but before the day is over, it will be 87 degrees, which I assume will be 31 Celsius. And so we'll one up you on that one. This is a mild day. It's going to get much hotter here.
Oh no.
Yeah.
You just have to stay cool.
That is correct. Yes. All right. Well, thank you for everything.
Thank you. And see you again.
Amen. Yeah, and next time. Until next time.